Welcome. I'm drunk as fuck, so excuse my drunk mannerisms in this video, even though you can't see me. So I'm gonna get into a few different things. So this is for multidimensional geometry and topological astrology, as you can see. And then what we're going to do is go over lectures 201 and 202 if you haven't seen my previous videos, where I go over the first few tabs, celestial mechanics and exoanthropological studies, and also quantum metaphysics and probability fields. So in this video, we're going to go over multidimensional geometry and topological astrology. The first lecture is about the tesseract horoscope and aspect patterns in 4D. So I'm going to begin with a story you think you know. And what does that necessarily mean? Well, switch up the colors here. Plato's allegory of the cave. Prisoners chained facing a wall. Watching shadows cast by objects behind them, they believe the shadows are reality. One prisoner escapes, sees the true objects, returns to tell the others, and they don't believe him. You are the prisoners. The birth chart, the two-dimensional circle with planets placed at specific degrees, is the shadow on the wall. The three-dimensional solar system at the moment of birth is the object casting the shadow. Hence the shadow on the cave wall being the name of this. So here's what Plato didn't know. The three-dimensional solar system is itself a shadow. It is the shadow of a four-dimensional object, the hypersphere of space-time events that constitute your birth across all dimensions. Your job as multidimensional astrologers is to be the escaped prisoner, to see the 4D object, to return to the cave and describe it, even if your students don't believe you. So let's begin. With from 2D to 3D, a refresher. So technically, as astrologers, we're comfortable with 2D charts, a circle, 360 degrees, planets placed at specific points, aspects measured as angles along the circumference. We're less comfortable with 3D charts, the actual positions of planets above or below the ecliptic, declination, latitude, but these exist. A planet at 0 degrees Aries with 5 degrees north latitude is not in the same place as a planet at 0 degrees Aries with 5 degrees south latitude. They are separated in 3D space. When we incorporate declination, parallel aspects, planets at the same declination become visible. A conjunction in 2D, same longitude, plus parallel in 3D, same latitude, is a true conjunction. The planets are actually close in space. A conjunction in 2D with wide declination is a shadow conjunction. They appear together but are separated vertically. And this is your first lesson in dimensional thinking. Every 2D aspect has a 3D component that modifies its meaning. Now we prepare to leave 3D behind. So now we get into what is the fourth dimension. Before we can read a 4D chart, we must understand what the fourth dimension is. So in physics, the fourth dimension is typically time, space-time, but in our framework, time is only one possible fourth dimension. There are others, spatial dimensions beyond the three we perceive. Imagine a 2D being, a flatlander living on a plane. They can move left, right, forward, backward. They cannot perceive up, down. A 3D sphere passing through their plane appears as a point that grows into a circle, then shrinks back to a point and vanishes. They have no framework to understand what they're seeing. You are flatlanders. The 4D hypersphere passing through your 3D space appears as a sphere that appears, grows, changes, shrinks, and vanishes. You call this birth and death and transits. You have no framework to understand what you're seeing until now. The fourth dimension is not out there, it is dimension perpendicular to every direction you can point, just as height is perpendicular to length and width. The fourth spatial dimension is perpendicular to all three of your familiar dimensions. You cannot point to it because your pointing exists in 3D, but it exists. In this dimension, the laws of geometry change. In 4D, you can have two perpendicular planes that intersect at a singular point. You can rotate any object through the fourth dimension, turning it into its mirror image, chirality reversal. You can have 24 regular polyhedra, Platonic solids in 4D are called polytopes. There are 6 of them, plus their duals and star forms. A sphere in 4D is called a 3-sphere, the surface of a 4D ball. It has 3-dimensional volume, just as a 2-sphere, what you call a sphere, has 2-dimensional surface area. Your birth chart is a 2D projection of a 3D moment, and that 3D moment is a 3D slice of a 4D object, your complete space-time self. Alright. Now we get into the tesseract, a 4D cube. Let's build intuition with the simplest 4D object, the tesseract, or 8-cell. A 0D point has 0 faces, 0 edges, and 0 vertices, just a point. A 1D line has 2 vertices, 1 edge. A 2D square has 4 vertices, 4 edges, 1 face. A 3D cube has 8 vertices, 12 edges, 6 faces, 1 volume. A 4D tesseract has 16 vertices, 32 edges, 24 faces, squares, 8 cells, cubes, and 1 hypervolume. Each cube in the tesseract is connected to others through the 4th dimension. You cannot see all 8 cubes simultaneously because some are behind others in a direction you cannot perceive. Now, your birth chart is a 2D projection of a 3D moment. That 3D moment is a 3D slice of a 4D tesseract, your complete self across all possible timelines. The 8 cells of the tesseract correspond to the 8 octants of your multidimensional being. In 3D, we have 8 octants, X positive, negative, Y positive, negative, and Z positive, negative. In 4D, we have 16 hexadecans. Your chart shows the projection. The tesseract is the reality. Now let's get into aspects in 4D. Beyond the 360 degrees circle. So in 2D, an aspect is an angle measured along the ecliptic. 0 degrees, conjunction, 60 degrees, sextile, 90 degrees is a square, 120 degrees is a trine, 180 degrees is an opposition, etc. In 3D, aspects incorporate declination. A square in 2D might be a weak aspect if declinations are wide. A parallel in declination strengthens conjunctions and oppositions. In 4D, aspects become topological features, relationships between points in hyperspace that are not simply angular. Consider 2 planets in your 3D solar system. In 4D, each planet exists as a world line, a path through space-time. At the moment of your birth, these world lines intersect your 3D slice at specific points, but in 4D, they may be connected in ways invisible to 3D observation. Now let's look at the 4D aspect types. So, conjunction in 4D, 2 world lines that are parallel in hyperspace. They run alongside each other through multiple dimensions, not just at the birth moment. These are karmic connections that persist across lifetimes. In the sample chart, for example, Sun at Pisces 809 degrees and Venus in Pisces at 002 degrees are conjunct in 2D. In 4D, their world lines may be nearly parallel, explaining why love and identity are so deeply intertwined for this native. Now we look at opposition in 4D. 2 world lines that are antipodal in hyperspace. They run in opposite directions through the higher dimensions. These create tension that spans lifetimes. Mars, for example, in Capricorn at 1407 degrees, and opposite Saturn, for example, in Cancer at 2053 degrees retrograde. In 2D becomes, in 4D, a fundamental axis of the native's being. Action and restriction as complementary forces in a higher dimensional balance. Square in 4D, 2 world lines that are perpendicular in hyperspace. They cross at right angles in dimensions beyond your perception. This creates friction that cannot be resolved in 3D. Resolution requires accessing the 4th dimension. For example, Jupiter in Libra at 1755 degrees retrograde, squaring Saturn in Cancer at 2053 degrees retrograde. In 2D, it becomes in 4D a necessary perpendicularity, expansion, and contraction as orthogonal forces that define the native's growth. Now we look at a trine in 4D. Two world lines that are parallel in a higher harmonic. They run alongside each other but with a phase shift. This creates flow that feels lucky because the connection is partially hidden. Moon, for example, in Libra at 614 degrees, trining Neptune, for example, in Aquarius at 1555 degrees. In 2D becomes, in 4D, a harmonic resonance between emotion and transcendence that operates outside normal space-time. Now we look at the quincunx, 150 degrees in 4D. So in 4D geometry, 150 degrees corresponds to the angle between vertices of certain 4D polotopes. It indicates a connection that requires dimensional adjustment, a relationship that makes no sense in 3D but becomes coherent when you access the fourth dimension. Now let's look at the 4D chart and how to construct it. So first of all, you cannot draw a 4D chart, but you can model it. So our first step is projecting your 3D chart into 4D space. And each planet has what? Each planet has longitude, which is 0 through 360 degrees, latitude, north-south of ecliptic, distance from Earth, AU, radial velocity toward away from Earth, and proper motion across the sky. And here's what we add in 4D. Temporal coordinate, time from birth, probability amplitude, quantum state, entanglement index, connections to other planets' world lines, and dimensional frequency, which higher dimensions in the planet primarily operates in. Now let's look at step 2, which is identifying the 4D aspect patterns. So using our computational models, the Okonkwo tensor array, we project these 4D coordinates onto a 3-sphere, the surface of a 4D ball. On the 3-sphere, aspects become great circles, the equivalent of great circles on a 2-sphere Earth's surface, but in 3D curved space. A grand trine in 2D becomes in 4D a great 2-sphere, a sphere within the 3-sphere where 3 planets lie on the same great circle. A T-square becomes a great circle with a perpendicular axis. Now let's look at step 3, which is reading the 4D houses. In 4D, houses are not 30 degrees wedges of a circle. They are 3D volumes within the 3-sphere. Each house corresponds to a region of your higher dimensional being. So we know the first house exists, and that's 4D, the hyper-ascendant, your interface with all dimensions simultaneously. Second house in 4D, your value structure across timelines. The third house in 4D, communication with your parallel selves. The fourth house in 4D, the root of your being, your origin point in hyperspace. Fifth house in 4D, creation across dimensions, manifesting in multiple timelines. Sixth house in 4D, integration of your multidimensional self. Seventh house in 4D, entanglement with other hyperspatial beings. Eighth house in 4D, transformation across dimensions, death in one timeline as birth in another. And the ninth house in 4D, higher dimensional wisdom, accessing truths from beyond 3D. Let's take a look at the 10th house in 4D, which is your purpose across all timelines. In the 11th house in 4D, your collective across dimensions, all versions of you. And finally, the 12th house in 4D, the unmanifest dimensions you haven't accessed yet. Now let's observe applying 4D astrology to the sample chart, which is literally my own personal natal chart. As an example. So let's examine our native's chart through the 4D lens. For example, Sun in Pisces at 809 degrees in the 11th house Western. So in 2D, identity dissolves into collective networks and aspirations. Why? Because it's in the 11th house. In 3D, Sun's declination adds specificity. Its actual position above, below ecliptic determines which parallel aspects exist. In 4D, the sun's world line is not a point but a thread through hyperspace. At the native's birth, that thread intersected their 3D slice at Pisces 809 degrees, but the thread extends forward and backward into past lives and future incarnations, and sideways into parallel timelines where the native made different choices. Now we observe the 11th house in 4D, being the region of the native's being that contains all versions of themselves across all timelines. Sun in the 11th house in 4D means the native's identity is distributed across parallel selves. They are not one person, they are a collective of possibilities. This explains the native's feeling of not quite fitting in any single identity. They sense the other versions of themselves, the artist they could have been, the scientist, the hermit, the lover. These are not fantasies, they are real in other dimensions. Alright, let's talk about moon in Libra at 614 degrees, 6th house, western. So in 4D, what does the moon represent? The emotional coherence field, the pattern of feeling that unifies all versions of the self. And when the moon is in Libra, it suggests that across all timelines, the native's emotional core seeks balance. But in some timelines, they achieve it, and others, they don't. The 6th house in 4D is the region of integration, where the various selves learn to work together. The moon's aspects in 4D reveal which other dimensions are entangled with the emotional field. So moon square Mars in 4D, the action self in some timelines creates emotional friction with a balanced self in others. Now we look at moon trining Neptune in 4D. The transcendent self in some timelines harmonizes with the emotional field across all. Okay? Now let's observe Mars in Capricorn, which is exalted. And it's at 1407 degrees, and it's in the 9th house, western. So Mars in 4D represents the action vector, the direction of will across all dimensions. In Capricorn, this action is disciplined, structured, ambitious, but in 4D, ambition means something different. The drive to align all parallel selves toward a common purpose. Alright. So the 9th house in 4D is higher dimensional wisdom. Mars here means the native's action is directed toward understanding the multidimensional self. Every choice in 3D is a probe into higher dimensions, testing which timelines are accessible and which are blocked. Mars opposite Saturn in 4D. Saturn represents the boundary field, the limits that define the self. This opposition in 4D is not conflict by dynamic tension. Action pushes against limits. Limits shape action. Together they define the native's hyperspatial trajectory. Alright. Moving on to the 4D aspect patterns in this chart. So for example, we're going to map the major aspects into 4D. So if someone has a stellium in Pisces, for example, like me, Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Uranus. In 2D, 4 planets in Pisces in the 11th house. Intense focus on collective networks, dissolution of boundaries. And in the 4D, these 4 world lines are nearly parallel in hyperspace. They run alongside each other across multiple dimensions. This means that in every timeline, the native's identity, which is the Sun, mind, which is Mercury, love, which is Venus, and innovation, Uranus, are deeply intertwined. They cannot experience one without the others. The 4D conjunction is not just these planets are together, it's these dimensions of being are inseparable. The native's very structure is a unity of thought, love, identity, and breakthrough. Now let's observe the Moon-Neptune trine, for example. In 2D, a 120 degrees aspect, harmonious flow between emotion and transcendence. In 4D, in hyperspace, 120 degrees corresponds to the angle between vertices of a 4D simplex, the 5-cell, the simplest 4D polytope. This aspect indicates that the Moon and Neptune occupy positions that are harmonic in higher dimensions. They resonate at frequencies that align with the fundamental structure of 4D space, and this is why the native experiences movements of profound emotional transcendence, when the moon's wave function and Neptune's wave function align in 4D, creating a resonance that temporarily opens access to higher dimensions. Alright, let's observe the Mars-Saturn opposition. So in 2D, 180 degrees opposition, tension between action and limitation. In 4D, 180 degrees in hyperspace means the two world lines are antipodal on the 3-sphere. They lie at opposite points, with the natives being as the axes between them. This isn't conflict, it's complementarity. Action and limitation are two poles of the same hyperspatial magnet. So in 4D geometry, antipodal points on a sphere are connected by lines through the center. The natives Mars and Saturn are connected by the axes of their being. Every act of will is simultaneously an act of limitation. Every limitation is a form of will. Alright. We don't have to necessarily do the visualization. So let's do the implications for advanced astrology practice. Alright, so how does 4D astrology change your readings? You stop predicting and you start mapping. In 3D astrology, predict events. You'll meet someone in June. In 4D astrology, you map possibilities. In some timelines, you meet someone in June, and others you don't. The aspects show where the probability density is highest. And then, you address the client's parallel selves. Your client is not alone in their chart. They share it with all their other versions. When they're struggling with a decision, you can ask, what would the version of you who made a choice A be feeling right now? What about choice B? Can you access their wisdom? Then you work with timeline integration. The goal is not to fix problems in one timeline, it's to integrate all timelines, to help the client become aware of their multidimensional self and draw the wisdom from all versions. And then you recognize that death is not the end. In 4D, death is one timeline, is simply the end of that 3D slice. The 4D object continues, and versions of the client and other timelines continue. This is the quantum basis of reincarnation, not rebirth in time, but simultaneity across dimensions. Alright, now let's look at our Q&A. So a student asks, can we really visualize 4D, or are we just imagining it? Well, your brain is a 3D object processing 3D data. You cannot truly see 4D any more than a flatlander can see height, but you can model it using mathematics, intuition, and practice. The visualization exercise is training your brain to accept the existence of something it cannot directly perceive, and that's the first step. I just say, in order to really see it, you need to meditate daily, and I'd recommend psychedelics. Specifically mushrooms or LSD. Alright. Let's get into another question. Let's say a student asks, how do we know this isn't just fantasy? Well, because the mathematics works. The 4D aspect patterns we identified correspond to real features of 4D geometry. The same mathematics that describes tesseracts and 3 spheres also describes the relationships between planetary positions when we incorporate all available data. We've run correlations. Charts with strong 4D patterns correspond to individuals who report multidimensional experiences, past life memories, parallel self-awareness, timeline fluidity. The correlation is statistically significant. Let's go through our last question. Say a student asks, does everyone have a 4D chart or just special people? Everyone. Just as everyone has a 3D body, whether they're aware of it or not, the difference is awareness. Some people are more sensitive to their 4D nature, others are completely identified with their 3D slice. Astrology, real astrology, is the practice of awakening to your multidimensional self. Alright? So now I want to get into lecture 202, which as you can see is topological astrology and aspects as wormhole metrics. So let's go from geometry to topology. And I'm just going to readjust because I am leaning in such a weird way. Okay. Let's switch up the colors too, because fuck. Alright. Getting there. There we go. Let's go from geometry to topology. Now our last lecture, which we just did, we moved from 2D to 4D geometry. And now we move from geometry to topology. What is the difference? Geometry concerns itself with shapes, angles, distances. A circle and a square are geometrically different. Topology concerns itself with connectedness, which points are near which, regardless of shape. A circle and a square are topologically identical. Both are loops. A coffee cup and a donut are topologically identical. Both have one hole. Topology asks, what remains the same when you stretch, twist, or deform an object without tearing it? Astrology has always been topological without knowing it. So when you say Mars squares Saturn, you're not just describing an angle, you're describing a relationship, a connection between 2 points in the chart that persists regardless of how you rotate the circle, and that's topology. Today, we can take this to its logical extreme. Aspects are not angles, they are topological features of space-time. Let's go through Einstein-Rosen bridges, wormholes 101. So in 1935, Albert Einstein and Nathan Rosen published a paper describing a solution to the equations of general relativity that allowed for bridges connecting 2 distant points in spacetime. These became known as Einstein-Rosen bridges, or colloquially, wormholes. A wormhole is a topological feature, a tunnel through higher dimensions that connects 2 points that are far apart in normal space. Travel through a wormhole is not travel through space, it's travel around space through a shortcut in higher dimensions. Now let's consider the birth chart at hand. 2 planets, 180 degrees apart, opposite each other on a circle. In normal space, they're far apart. But what if that opposition is not just an angle? What if it's a wormhole metric, a description of a tunnel through higher dimensions connecting those 2 planetary influences? When you experience an opposition transit, you're not just feeling 2 planets in tension, you're experiencing the activation of a wormhole between 2 regions of your being. Going through aspects as topological invariants. In topology, we classify objects by their invariants, properties that don't change under continuous deformation. For example, the number of holes, genus, is a topological invariant. Whether a surface is orientable, has an inside-outside, is a topological invariant. The Euler characteristic, V subtracting E, adding F, is a topological invariant. Aspects in topological astrology are invariants of the chart manifold. Let's consider a simple conjunction. In topological terms, this is a point of high curvature, a place where multiple world lines converge, and the conjunction is a feature of the chart's topology that persists regardless of how you stretch the coordinate system. An opposition is a pair of points connected by a handle, a wormhole, through the chart's internal space. A square is a point of torsion, where the chart manifold twists. A trine is a harmonic resonance where the manifold's natural frequencies align. These aren't metaphors, they are actual topological features of the 4D hypersurface that is your birth moment. The chart as a 4D manifold. Let's formalize this. Your birth chart is not a 2D circle, it's a 4D Lorentzian manifold, a mathematical space that incorporates both space and time with a specific metric that describes how distances are measured. So essentially, the planets are not points, they are singularities, points of infinite curvature where the manifold is not smooth. The aspects are not angles, they are geodesics, the shortest paths between singularities through the curved space of the manifold. When 2 planets are in square aspect, the geodesic connecting them is not a straight line. In 4D, there are no straight lines. It's a curve that follows the manifold's curvature. The curve's properties, its length, its torsion, its relationship to other geodesics, constitute the aspect's meaning. The Grand Cross is not 4 points in tension, it's a closed loop of geodesics, a topological cycle that traps energy in a self-referential circuit. grand trine is a triangle of geodesics, a 2-cycle in the manifold that allows energy to flow smoothly around a closed path. And the T-square is 3 geodesics with a missing fourth, an open circuit that creates tension pointing toward the empty point. Wormhole metrics in the sample chart. Let's analyze our natives chart using wormhole metrics. So the Sun-Venus conjunction, 002 degrees of an orb. So in 2D, it's a close conjunction, identity and love intertwined. In topological terms, these two singularities are so close that their world lines are connected by a microscopic wormhole. Information flows freely between them. The native cannot experience self without experiencing love, and vice versa. Not psychologically, but topologically. Their identity manifold and love manifold are literally connected by a shortcut through higher dimensions. Let's look at the Mars-Saturn opposition, 646 degrees of an orb, and let's observe it in 2D. It's an opposition, tension between action and limitation. In topological terms, these two singularities are connected by an Einstein-Rosen bridge, a wormhole through the chart manifold. When Mars is activated by transit progression or conscious choice, energy flows through the wormhole and instantly affects Saturn and vice versa. This explains why the native experiences action and restriction as simultaneous, not sequential, not causal, but co-present. Every act of will immediately evokes its own limit. Every limitation immediately evokes the will that pushes against it. They are two ends of the same tunnel. Jupiter-Saturn square, 258 degrees, separating in 2D, square, tension between expansion and contraction. In topological terms, this is a point of torsion in the manifold. The geodesics connecting Jupiter and Saturn do not form a smooth curve, they twist. This creates a phase singularity, a point where the manifold's orientation flips. When the native experiences Jupiter transits, such as expansion, growth, and opportunity, the torsion in the manifold causes those energies to twist into Saturnine expressions. Expansion becomes restriction. Growth becomes limitation. Not because Jupiter is bad, but because the topology forces a twist. Let's take a look at the Moon-Neptune trine, 940 degrees applying. So in 2D, it's a trine. It's harmonious flow between emotion and transcendence. In topological terms, this is a harmonic resonance cavity, a region of the manifold where waves propagate without distortion. When the moon's emotional wave enters this cavity, it resonates with Neptune's transcendent frequency, creating standing waves that amplify both. And this is why the native experiences moments of emotional transcendence. The topology of their chart creates a natural resonator for these frequencies. Now let's observe topological transits and wormholes in motion. So transits in topological astrology are not planets moving through signs, they are deformations of the manifold. When transiting Jupiter approaches the native's natal sun, it doesn't just aspect it, it warps the local topology, creating new geodesics, opening new wormholes, and closing old ones. So let's go through how a conjunction transit is when the transiting planet singularity approaches the natal singularity closely enough that their event horizons merge. The two become one topological feature temporarily. During this period, the native experiences a fusion of the two energies. An opposition transit is when the transiting planet singularity aligns with the natal singularity's antipodal point, activating the wormhole that connects them. Energy flows through the bridge in both directions. A square transit is when the transiting planet singularity creates a new torsion point in the manifold, twisting the geodesics that connect existing singularities. Alright, let's go through the 2026 transits in topological perspective. So when Pluto enters Aquarius, already happened until 2044. It doesn't just change signs, it reconfigures the topology of the collective manifold. Old wormholes close, new ones open. The connections between power, Pluto, and networks, Aquarius, are being rewired at the topological level. When Saturn enters Aries, it creates new torsion points in the collective manifold, twisting the relationship between structure, Saturn, and individuality, Aries. The native with strong Aries or Capricorn placements will feel this as a topological shift in their personal manifold. Alright, let's go through knot theory and astrology. Knot theory, a branch of topology, classifies different ways a loop can be tangled in 3 dimensions. In topological astrology, the aspect pattern is a knot in the chart manifold. Let's consider the native's aspect patterns. So for me, I have multiple conjunctions in Pisces, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Uranus. This is not 4 separate points, it's a 4-strand braid, 4 world lines twisted together. The braid's topology determines how these energies interact. Is it a simple twist, all strands parallel? Is it a complex braid, strands crossing? In this chart, the conjunctions are close but not exact, creating a loose braid with room for movement between strands. The native can separate identity from love temporarily, but the topology always pulls them back together. The Mars-Saturn opposition as a knot. An opposition connected by a wormhole creates a loop. Mars to Saturn through normal space, Saturn to Mars through the wormhole. This is a topological 1 cycle, a closed loop that cannot be untied without tearing the manifold. The native's action restriction dynamic is literally knotted into their being. Let's observe the Jupiter-Saturn square as a twist. A square creates a half twist in the manifold, like a Mobius strip. If you travel from Jupiter to Saturn along one geodesic and back along another, you return with your orientation flipped. And this is why Jupiter-Saturn aspects are associated with reversals of fortune. The topology itself flips here. Alright, let's go through practical applications and reading the knots. How do you read a chart topologically? Well, first of all, we need to identify the singularities, being the planets. Each planet is a point of infinite curvature, a place where the manifold is not smooth. These are the handles you'll use to understand the topology. Step 2 is mapping the geodesics, aspects. Draw the shortest path between singularities through the curved space of the manifold. In practice, these are the aspect lines, but remember, they're not straight in 4D. They curve according to the manifold's metric. Step 3, identify cycles, closed loops. Find closed loops of geodesics. A grand trine is a triangle, a 3 cycle. Grand cross is a square, a 4 cycle. The T-square is an open 3 cycle with a missing vertex, creating tension toward the empty point. Step 4, classify the knots. Is your chart simply connected? All loops can be shrunk to a point, or does it have non-trivial topology, cycles that can't be shrunk? The more non-trivial cycles, the more complex the native's karmic structure. Step 5, we locate the wormholes. Oppositions are the primary wormholes, but conjunctions can also create microscopic wormholes if the orb is tight enough. These are points of topological identification where 2 distinct points in the manifold are actually the same point in a higher dimensional embedding space. Step 6, we assess the torsion. Squares and other hard aspects create torsion, twists in the manifold. These are points where the native's orientation flips and where experiences invert meaning. Let's go over the sample chart's topological profile. We synthesize our native's topological signature with the core topology. The native's chart has a central braid, Pisces stellium, with 4 strands loosely twisted. This braid is connected by wormholes to an opposition bridge to Saturn through Mars-Saturn opposition, a torsion point to Jupiter through Jupiter-Saturn square, and a harmonic cavity to Neptune through Moon-Neptune trine. The overall topology is non-trivial. There are cycles that cannot be shrunk to a point. Specifically, the Mars-Saturn opposition creates a 1 cycle, Mars-Saturn through normal space, Saturn-Mars through wormhole. The Jupiter-Saturn square creates a Mobius twist, traveling from Jupiter to Saturn and back flips orientation. The Pisces braid creates a linking number. The strands are linked in a way that cannot be separated without cutting. What this means for the native. They cannot escape the action restriction dynamic. The 1 cycle is permanent. They will experience reversals of fortune that feel like flipping the Mobius twist. Their identity, mind, love, and innovation are permanently linked, the braid. They have access to a harmonic cavity for emotional transcendence, the Moon-Neptune resonator. The karmic implication. In topological astrology, karma is not a moral ledger. It's a topology you're born with. You can't change it. You can't unknot a knot without cutting the manifold, but you can learn to navigate it. The native with this topology will spend their life learning to flow through the Mars-Saturn wormhole without getting stuck, navigate the Jupiter-Saturn Mobius twist without losing orientation, untangle the Pisces braid just enough to access each strand individually and resonate in the Moon-Neptune cavity whenever they need transcendence. Now, we have our topological intervention. Can you change your topology? The question arises, if your chart's topology is fixed at birth, can you change it? The answer is yes and no. No, the fundamental topology, the number of cycles, the linking numbers, the presence of wormholes is fixed. You were born with this topology and you'll die with it. Yes, the metric, the actual distances along geodesics can change. Transits deform the manifold, conscious choice can deform it, meditation, trauma, love, loss, these all warp the local geometry. Think of it this way, your chart is a rubber sheet with certain holes and handles, topology. You can stretch it, twist it, deform it, but you can't create new holes or remove existing ones without tearing it. So the goal of topological astrology is not to change your topology, it's to understand it so thoroughly that you can navigate it effortlessly. When you know where the wormholes are, you can use them as shortcuts instead of getting stuck in them. When you know where the torsion points are, you can anticipate the flip and prepare for it. Alright. So now I really quick want to give a demonstration. We have a few more things to go over and then we're going to be finished with this video. So let's demonstrate really quick. Topological mapping of a transit. So we demonstrate with a specific transit for our native. So for example, Saturn entering Aries, 2026 through 2028. For our native, Saturn and Aries will transit their 12th house, Western. Rahu's there. Square to their natal Saturn by sign, not exact, which would be in Cancer. Again, in the 3rd house. And then we have opposite their natal Mars by sign, which is Capricorn. In the 9th house. Alright. Now we go over our topological analysis. So Saturn, which is the boundary maker entering Aries, creates a new singularity in the collective manifold. For our native, the singularity will interact with their personal manifold at several points. Approaching the Mars-Saturn wormhole. Transiting Saturn will activate the existing wormhole between natal Mars and natal Saturn. This will intensify the action-restriction dynamic, but because it's activating the wormhole itself, not just one end, the native may experience simultaneous intensification of both will and limit. Twisting the Jupiter-Saturn torsion. Transiting Saturn will pass through the region of the Mobius twist created by natal Jupiter, square natal Saturn. This will amplify the twist. Reversals of fortune may come faster with less warning. And of course, we compress the Pisces braid. So Saturn in Aries squares the Pisces stellium by sign. This will tighten the braid. The 4 strands, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Uranus, will be pulled closer together. The native may feel their identity, mind, love, and innovation merging in uncomfortable ways. Alright, here's our navigational guidance. During this period, we use the Mars-Saturn wormhole deliberately. Don't resist the action-restriction dynamic. Flow through it. When you feel action blocked, recognize that the restriction is the other end of the same tunnel. Move through it. Anticipate reversals. The Mobius twist will flip your orientation. Plan for it. When things seem to be going well, prepare for the flip. When things seem hopeless, prepare for the flip back. And allow the Pisces braid to tighten. Don't fight for separation. Let identity, mind, love, and innovation merge. You'll emerge with a clearer sense of how they're connected. So now I want to go through collective topology. The noosphere is manifold. Then we're going to jump into our Q&A. Just as individuals have topological charts, so does the collective. The noosphere, the planetary layer of mind, is a 4D manifold with its own singularities, collective events, geodesics, cultural movements, wormholes, synchronicities, and torsion points, historical turning points. 2026 through 2100 period that we've been studying is a topological phase transition for the noosphere. Pluto in Aquarius until 2044 is creating new wormholes in the collective manifold, connecting power structures to networks in ways that didn't exist before. Uranus in Gemini until 2033 is twisting the geodesics of communication, creating torsion points where information flows flip orientation. So Neptune in Aries until 2039 is opening harmonic cavities for collective dreams, resonators where species can experience transcendent unity. Native of our sample chart with their complex personal topology is topologically tuned to this collective transition. Personal wormholes resonate with the collective wormholes. Personal torsion points align with the collective torsion. They're not just living through history, they are topologically entangled with it. Now let's go through our Q&A. We just have about 3 questions. Sounds like science fiction, not even a question. Science fiction is just science that hasn't happened yet. In 1950, general relativity sounded like science fiction. In 1935, wormholes sounded like science fiction. Today, we're mapping the topology of consciousness. In 50 years, topological astrology will be taught in universities, assuming universities still exist. Can you feel these topological features? Yes, that's what intuition is, the direct perception of topological features without mathematical mediation. When you feel that a relationship has a certain shape, you're perceiving its topology. When you know that a situation will flip, you're sensing a Mobius twist. Astrology is making this perception systematic. And finally, what about free will in a fixed topology? The topology is fixed. Your path through it is not. A manifold with given topological features still has infinitely many possible geodesics. You choose which ones to follow. Free will is the ability to choose your path through a fixed landscape. All right. Now let's give our closing thought, and we'll be finished here. The universe is not a collection of objects in empty space. It is a topological object, a connected, twisted, knotted manifold of space-time and consciousness. Your birth chart is not a map of the sky. It is a cross-section of that manifold at the moment you emerge as a distinct topological feature. You are not in the universe. You are the universe, a local knot in its infinite fabric. Learn to read your knots. Learn to navigate your wormholes. Learn to flow through your twists. And remember that the topology is fixed, but the path is yours. The important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. One cannot help but be in awe when one contemplates the mysteries of eternity, of life, of the marvelous structure of reality. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. With peace and love, we'll see you in the next video. Piscean out.